You're 28. You have built 2 successful funds now. What would you tell your younger self to put yourself in the best possible position to succeed building funds, and how would you prepare?
So when it comes to launching a career as an asset manager, and I know there's a lot of people out there that want it, right? Because there's this huge hype around like day trading and trading on social media, and everybody thinks they are a trader, they want to be a trader, and then the next leap, so to say, for them is to think, well, why don't I manage other people's money? There's really 3 core skill sets that it requires, and the challenging part is that they rarely come together in a person. Why you have to be really multifaceted, without clapping myself on the back, which is also most times you have 2 or 3 founders of a fund. Why? Because one might be good at one or the other, right? So one of them is niche expertise. For me to run a crypto fund, like I needed to know crypto better than 99.9% of the people.
Yes.
Right? For me to run a metaverse fund, I need to know VR and AR better than 99.9% of people, right?
So whatever fund you build, like within that topic, you need to be like
absolutely.
top.
And this is also why you can forget about launching a generalist fund as a nobody. A generalist fund is like, it's pretty much a wide mandate. You can invest in whatever you want. Or like in VC would be like a tech VC. Well, that's going to be hard. You got to niche down to something specific that people want, that you're good at, right? And if you run a liquid fund, right, you're not just going to launch a global macro fund. You're not just going to launch like a regular equity fund, right? Crypto, again, was something where it was a rare offering, very niche, that people wanted, that I was good at. That was why it was possible. If I had started like an equities fund, this would have never happened, right? Because on one hand, it was a red ocean. There's a huge established industry. Why would they invest with me, a newcomer? Nobody, right? And equally, I don't know more about equities than, let's say, I'm like in equities, I'm competing against Ray Dalio. Yes. I'm competing against Ken Griffin, yes. Right? Forget about it. In crypto, those guys are not touching crypto.
Yes.
So it is a much smaller playing field with a lot of demand.
Can you tell a quick story that visualizes that? When you were 23 launching the fund, like an experience you had where you got taken seriously by someone who normally that would never talk to you, but because you have this expertise, they were interested and they want to listen to you. Like, can you tell like a story that shows that?
The takeoff moment, I think, was really like in late 2020, early 2021, when really odd things started happening, right? Like in 2019, I was still buying books on like family offices to really figure out like, how does this magical world of the family offices work, right? Because like nobody in my family ever had a family office. Nobody I knew ever had a family office. So like this seemed like these ultra rich people that hide somewhere in the corners of the world, right?
Just your eyes are a little red.
They still are. It's the skincare routine. But so then in 2020 was really what I would say was this change of pace, this change of tone really in my career, where until that point I'd been a quiet student, right? I would read other fund managers' newsletters. I would like absorb as much as I could. And in 2020 was the first time I launched my newsletter, right? When I would share my research, when I would commentate on markets, when I would talk about DeFi. I was one of the first to really explain what happened in DeFi, why DeFi is a big opportunity and so forth. And it was that year, Mark Yusko, who's now an LP, and he's been on our podcast, he's been at the summit, he cold tweeted at me. And he said like, hey, I'm coming to Santa Monica. Why don't we grab coffee? And at the time, I was still living in my apartment in LA. Back then, JP already joined the team, but I was like, yo, can you believe it? Like Mark Yusko just like tweeted me, because like Mark was somebody who was always on CNBC and on Bloomberg and whatnot. So I'm like, shit. And I was so, nervous and excited. Like I put on a suit, the first time I put on a suit in probably like who knows how long at that point. And, I drove there and then we talked and everything, and nothing happened for like 2 years, but we made that relationship. And that was the moment when I realized like, wow, you know what? You have an edge in this market. You have knowledge in this market that sets you apart from the rest. And I think starting that moment, I started using that more, yes. Meaning building out that edge and being confident in it and sharing it.
So you need to be an expert. What is the next thing?
You need to be an expert, and like that can be knowledge, that can be also strategy, like maybe a crazy good derivatives trader, like a market neutral kind of approach. That's one thing. The second thing is capital raising and networking, right? At the end of the day, if no money comes in, there's nothing to trade. right? And unless you're independently rich, in which case you don't need a fund, you can just run your family office, right? Like, again, nothing happens, right? And you need a certain base level of money before you can even launch. Why? Because there's expenses, and without that base level, it just doesn't make sense. It will cost you more than it makes you, which actually was the case for me in the first 2 years or so, or 3 years, where running the fund cost me more money operationally than I made.
How much does it cost to start and then?
I mean, nowadays it's even more expensive, especially for industries like crypto. But like, for example, like an audit, right? An audit from a top tier auditor for a small fund, small fund that could be 5 million to 25 million, that can run you $50,000 to $100,000 a year. So, for example, for one of the funds, I was quoted like $90,000 a year, and I was like, well, fuck, over 10 years, that is almost $1 million. Which is now we put in clause with some of the funds where we say, like, audits kicking at a certain AUM threshold. That way it doesn't stop you from it. But anyway, you need to have a network, right? And like, ironically, me coming in, I didn't have it, right? Because who can invest? Accredited investors. What's an accredited investor? Somebody with $1 million or more, right? So, on Instagram, this is why, like, funny aside to listeners, right? I think talking about numbers and putting numbers in my captions is cringe as shit, right? But Raphael makes me do it. Why? Because like on YouTube, when people say like, he's a millionaire, or like he made $10 million, right? Like, it's a big thing that like, gets clicks, clickbaity, right? But here's the thing, in the world of finance, right? In the world of finance, the show starts at $1 million. You don't qualify under $1 million, right? It's really weird, because in the real world, $1 million is still a lot of money. But in the finance world, like, you're not even talked to unless you're there. That's the starting point. And even at $1 million, you're kind of small fish, right? Like, to get into private bank, you need like 5 to 20 million. To have a family office, you need like 50. So these are bigger numbers. So anyway, when I first started, like, I knew like 3 millionaires maybe, tops. One was like the investor at Fundus, my prior startup. One was like a mentor from college, like there's different people. But I say different people, like there's 3, right? There's very few. None of them invested. So like, I came from very small spot. So I had to earn my, investor base one by one, right? We started super small with like 7. And then that grew to like over 110, 130 over the coming 5 years. Now, in an ideal world, if you launch a fund, you need to have a thriving network of high net worth individuals. So either you have that going into it, or the second you start, you need to start building it out. That means going to places where high net worth individuals will be. So like, there's conferences like iConnections, like it's literally a conference for allocators, or Battlefin, and like there's all these kind of conferences, Super Return Summit, right? And they're expensive. Like the first time I attended iConnections, it ran me $24,000 to attend, $24,000. And so like, I had a booth, and every 30 minutes, another allocator would come, sit down with me, and talk for 30 minutes. And so I had 30 minutes to pitch them, next one. I had like 20 of those. But those things are expensive, and ironically, from that specific summit, I raised zero.
Ah, fuck.
Zero, right? But I made so many connections. Like, all these people ended up becoming LinkedIn connections. They became, some of them became friends. Some of them became like just like contacts in my network. And then at some point they said, like, they might have made an introduction, and they said, hey, this guy wants to invest in crypto, and I thought of you. Here, you should talk to him. Right.
So it didn't make money directly from that event, like immediately, but it had
it ended up working. So for example, one of the big clients that you met, that was in our vlog, I'm not gonna say the name because I want to say Anon, was in Hong Kong. So one of our big allocators that came from Hong Kong, for example, they came through that network, right?
Yeah.
So in the end, over the span of a year or so, like, it did pay off. But besides that, it's also going deep in your network. And what ended up happening is that by showing high value, I might have had a friend from high school, a friend from college, where they themselves might not have money, but they know somebody, and then they introduce you. Like, here's the visual. You want to be the guy or the girl that every person that knows you wants to introduce you to their most valuable friends. So, although you don't want to be the guy that, like, every time you go out, every time you meet people, right? Like, you talk about your work, but ideally, like, you are generally passionate about what you do. Right? And so you do want people to know you as somebody that's really committed to the crypto space, the VR space, and so forth. So if they ever come across opportunity, whether that is a founder that you might invest in that they want to introduce you to, whether that is a potential investor, right? Like, when the Apple headset comes out, I want all of my friends, all of my acquaintances to think of me, be like, oh yeah, Felix has been allocating to VR for the last 2 years. And then when they sit at, the dinner table with the rich uncle, whatever, and they talk, oh, have you seen the Apple headset? Oh, I actually have a friend, So the bottom line is like building a network, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It doesn't just magically appear, right? It comes from showing value, being comfortable and confident and passionate about what you do and showing it and putting in the years. So that's the second skill, right? And now you might realize that those two might be at odds. There might be a person that's the hyper nerd that's really good at a certain subject matter, but that cannot talk to people for their life. And then there's someone else that is an amazing networker. He just walks into any room and makes friends, right? That might be an amazing capital raiser, but they might not be good at investing. The only reason I work with wearing both hats, I would say, is because we now live in a digital age. Because, for example, at physical networking events, like I'm an introvert, where if I have to go to like a physical event, like I don't like walking up to groups.
Yeah, no, the few events that were with you, it's like you talk to people that come up to you.
Correct.
And the rest you're not.
I don't like cold emailing. I don't like cold calling. I don't like cold walking out to people. People need to come to me. But anyway, those are two completely different skill sets that both must be mastered. The third one is being a good operator. Because you can stay a one-man show, sure, but even then, there are other skill sets. For example, every single month, I have to do accounting, prepare the NAV statements along with my administrators. I have to review a lot of spreadsheets, making sure everything's accurate. I have to have a good base understanding of legal, because with the venture fund, we're signing term sheets, we're signing contracts, and of course, I've got the lawyers reviewing everything, but you need to be able to speak to at least the base language so that, you can go through it, you catch things, because like every single contract, I don't just have the lawyers read them, I read them too. Because, the lawyer might find the thing that you're asking about. But if you're not asking about something, like if you don't know what to ask for, they don't know what to look for, right? So you need a base knowledge of legal. You need to have a base knowledge of accounting. You need to have people skills, like running a team. One of my weak spots, again, But I'm learning on the job, so to say, like HR, incentivizing people, motivating people, finding the right balance between delegating and like telling people what to do, but also giving them the freedom for them to figure out on their own what they need to do. So there's these three different angles, like the down nitty-gritty investing side, the expertise. There's the people person skills, being able to raise money, and then there's the operational skills of like doing the stuff, the back office stuff that still needs to get done, from accounting, legal, audits, work regulators, and running a team. All those things matter. And oftentimes that's different people. In my case, I wear all those hats. I've loved and hated wearing all those hats in different times. Personally, I find it extremely engaging because now I know the business in and out. And as a result, I know where every little screw and nut in my business is. And that way I can also teach anybody to take those pieces over. And at the same time, it speaks to different sides of me. Like if I was just locked down for 20 hours a day, okay, maybe not 20 hours, maybe 16 hours a day, like in my books doing research with charts, I would probably miss the social angle, right? Because even as an introvert, I still like talking to people. And so that's where the capital raiser comes in, where maybe for 2 hours a day, not that much, but 2 hours is enough. I help on Zoom calls. I host educational webinars on the metaverse. I go to conferences. And yeah.
So these are the 3 skills you need to start a fund.
Yes. And I would talk about off season. Right now is a miserable time to start a fund because less money is flowing into fund. There's a stat by Fortune magazine that we posted in our chat earlier, where in Fortune magazine it showed that emerging managers are raising less money than any time throughout the last decade. It was only in April, so like if you extrapolate for the year, let's say this year emerging managers raised $6 billion. The lowest in the last decade was in 2013 with $10 billion. So we're still 40% lower than the lowest year, which means don't launch a fund now, but work on those 3 skill sets. Expand your network. See if you can at least line up 20 credit investors, because if you know 20, you're lucky if 2 give you money. The reality is, you got to expect a hit rate of 10% or less. I think 5% is already very brave. And same thing, build out your edge. Become so expertise, because the expertise is what will increase your conversion rate. And on the operational front, at least read some books. There's, funny enough, one of our independent directors, Stan Stratchman, he wrote a book on hedge funds. That funny enough, like I read his book in LA before I ever hired him. So like when I hired him, I was like, wait, your name sounds familiar. And I looked him up, I was like, wait, I read your book when I was just getting started. And it was like kind of like an introduction to hedge funds, you know, that tells you about like how it works with the administrators, the auditors, the fund structure, and all these things.